Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I hope everybody had a great weekend, had a great 4th of July. But today, we've got a lot of baseball. We're in the throes of summer, and nothing goes together like the American summer and baseball. So we have All-Star rosters announced for the AL and the NL. We're going to get into them, go over some All-Star snubs as well, and then dip our feet into some basketball. There's still a lot going on in the NBA offseason so far. DeMar DeRozan is the newest member of the Sacramento Kings. We'll talk about all sides of that sign-in trade, and we'll talk about Dan Hurley. He officially signed a contract with UConn men's basketball to be their head coach. A huge extension for him. Obviously, he had all that attention from the Lakers this offseason. We'll talk a little bit about what that means for the future of UConn, why Dan Hurley stayed there, and what this means for the future of college basketball as a whole. But before we get into all of that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show today with the great American classic, the sport of baseball. And the All-Star rosters officially came out this weekend with all the reserves and all of the voted-in starters. We're going to start off in the NL with the starters this time. Just go down the list. First of all, the elected starters, the one that won the popular vote for the voting as far as fan votes go. That would be catcher William Contreras from the Milwaukee Brewers, first baseman Bryce Harper from the Philadelphia Phillies, Ketel Marte at second base from the Arizona Diamondbacks, Alec Boehm also from the Phillies at third base, Trey Turner, the starting shortstop, also from the Philadelphia Phillies. Another Brewer, the first of three outfield slots, goes to Christian Yelich, who's having a really good revitalized season, his first since he won those MVPs all those years ago. Outfield, Jurickson Profar, his first selection to the All-Star game. It's a great story from the San Diego Padres, and his teammate Fernando Tatis Jr. also from the San Diego Padres makes another All-Star appearance here. At DH, the starter Shohei Ohtani, obviously from the Dodgers. Now we'll get into the reserves before we'll start off with the starters here, right? I feel like they got most of these starters right. You could make the argument a couple of the outfield spots. Maybe Teoscar Hernandez gets in. Maybe Heliot Ramos gets in. But I think overall, I think they did a really good job. Mookie Betts could be a starter, but he's hurt, so I kind of understand why they went with Trey Turner over there. Outside from maybe having Mookie Betts be the starter, just ceremoniously at least being named the starter, I'd say they did a really good job getting the best 9 at each position. So I think they did a good job. Now, getting into reserves, we do have a couple more questions, and we'll get into the snubs a couple of, segments from now. But first of all, the reserves, at least for the batters, the hitters, we have Will Smith at catcher for the Dodgers, C.J. Abrams from the Washington Nationals, Pete Alonso from the Mets, Luis Arias from the Padres, Mookie Betts, there he is from the Dodgers, Elly De La Cruz gets his first All-Star nod from the Cincinnati Reds, Freddie Freeman, another All-Star nod from the Dodgers, Ryan McMahon from Colorado, Teoscar Hernandez, we talked about him, also from the Dodgers, Jackson Merrill from the San Diego Padres, Heliot Ramos from the Giants, Brian Reynolds from the Pirates, and Marcell Ozuna from Atlanta. Those are the reserves, and again, we'll get into some of the snubs later. There are a couple of small issues that I have with this. Not to say that none of these guys really deserved to make it. I might have picked someone else aside from Pete Alonso, but we'll get into all of that in our third segment when we go over the All-Star snubs. As far as pitchers go, Tyler Glasnow, Shohei Imanga, Reynaldo Lopez, Chris Sale, Paul Skeens. 10 starts in is already an all-star, and he is incredible. Ranger Suarez, Logan Webb, Zach Wheeler, and the relievers there. Ryan Helsey, Jeff Hoffman, Tanner Scott, Matt Strom, and Robert Suarez. Again, overall, I'd say it was a pretty solid list. There weren't too many. Too many difference. There aren't too many differences between. There aren't too many snubs. I'd say. I thought they did a really good job this season with their rosters. Now, I think overall, if we're comparing the NL to the AL rosters, I'd say it's probably closer on. It's probably better on the AL side, but we'll get into the AL in a second. Getting back to the starters here, there is going to be a couple of firsts. There's 32 players who made it to the All-Star game for the very first time. Uh, you know, Congratulations to all of them. In the NL, there, you have, excuse me, Jurickson Profar, a starter in his first All-Star game. C.J. Abrams from the Nationals making his first All-Star game. Ellie De La Cruz, uh, Heliot Ramos, all of these guys, Jackson Merrill, these guys making their first All-Star game. They deserved it. They really did. They've had great seasons overall, and I think it's been really, really impressive to see all these new faces, right? Entering into the MLB. Really, we're starting to see a turnover that we always talk about. These new, you know, turned over the new era, right? But it's very clear to see, right? Tyler Glass now, shockingly, his first All-Star selection. He's been awesome. Jeff Hoffman, his first. Shotei Imanga, obviously his first as a rookie. Reynaldo Lopez, also his first. Tanner Scott, Matt Strom, Paul Skeens, obviously, Ranger Suarez, and Robert Suarez, as well as Logan Webb, who that was one I was shocked by. They all make their first All Stars. That's their first All Stars as far as the NL goes. So it's again very, very cool to see all of these first timers make it in, and I think hopefully there's a bright future in the league right now for players, as far as this young talent goes. Uh, Again, there were a couple things that I disagreed with. Overall, I thought they did a really good job on these All Star rosters. There's always going to be spots where we're not 100% on the same page, obviously, with the MLB. But I think overall, like I said, they did a really good job. There weren't too many glaring weaknesses as far as the NL goes. We'll get into the AL roster actually in our next segment. We'll talk all about their new guys. Lots of excitement. Lots of excitement coming out of the AL. Lots of young guys. One more thing before we end this segment: the team with the most players in the NL obviously was the Phillies. They had, uh, excuse me, in the AL, obviously, in the NL, excuse me, obviously was the Phillies. They had three starters, as well as three pitchers two pitchers, and two relievers make it. So they had seven guys make this roster, out of just about 20. It's because they're the best team in baseball. So congratulations to the Phillies. They are on their way to the top team in the NL. So really, I'm excited. Paul Skeens gets to show up, and people are talking about whether or not he'll be the starter for the NL All Stars, which would be crazy. I think that'd be super cool to see. But we are going to move on to the AL in the next segment, so stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just gone over the NL roster. They had 7 Phillies that leads the way. We went over a couple of the new guys that came in. Again, there's 32 new All-Stars, first-time All-Stars. It's very exciting. It's kind of like a changing of the guard here in the MLB, and I'm very excited for this new era. Lots and lots of young talent coming up through the league. In this segment, though, we are going to go over the AL rosters before we go over some snubs from the NL and the AL in our next segment. So before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish up the other half of the All-Star roster, this time taking a look at the AL roster. Starters for the AL. And surprisingly, there's not that many Orioles, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but the first name on this list is Adley Rutschman. Adley Rutschman is the starting catcher, for the AL out of Baltimore. Vlad Guerrero Jr. from Toronto gets the first base slot. Second base goes to Jose Altuve from the Houston Astros. They've had a huge season turnaround, are vying for the division right now. Very impressive from them after the shaky start that they had to the beginning of their year. Third base, Jose Ramirez. J-Ram has been awesome for one of the best teams in the entirety of the AL in Cleveland. He is the heart and soul of that team. Absolutely deserves that nod. Gunnar Henderson at shortstop, Baltimore Oriole. That is a controversial one, and I do agree that Gunnar Henderson deserves that All-Stars, that starting spot, but you have a really cool battle, a really intense battle of shortstops between him and Bobby Witt Jr. Could even be the All-Star, could even be the MVP race between them. Obviously, Aaron Judge, who was the number 1 vote getter in the AL, is next there from the Yankees, alongside his teammate in the outfield, Juan Soto, also of the New York Yankees. Before we get to Stephen Kwan of the Cleveland right? That's a very, very interesting. Is a really cool addition, right? He's not a guy that's gonna wow you with power, but he's hitting. He's got the best average in the entire league, and he hits everything he swings at. He's got a great eye, and I love the way that Stephen Kwan plays the game. His defense in the outfield is amazing. His plate discipline is great, and his bat to ball skills are unmatched in the entire league. He gets that third outfield nod, which is awesome to see. And then the DH spot, Yordan Alvarez, who's just a freak of nature in that batter's box. I want to see him in the home run derby. He hasn't done it yet. That doesn't seem like a thing he's going to do, but Yordan Alvarez is the Houston is the DH starting from the Houston Astros. As far as reserves go, you got Salvi Perez making his 9th All-Star game. He's having a nice resurgence season in Kansas City as they kind of slowed down a little bit, but they've still exceeded a lot of expectations. Carlos Correa from the Twins, Rafael Devers from Boston, Josh Naylor also from Cleveland. We got a lot of Cleveland representation as they can, as like I said, they've been awesome so far. Isaac Paredes from the Rays has been sensational. He always is. I don't know how he does it. He hits 300 and he can't hit for power at all. He just kind of bloops a bunch of singles everywhere, and it's kind of impressive to watch. Marcus Semien gets the nod for Texas after coming off a World Series victory. Bobby Witt Jr., we already talked about him. He gets in that reserve spot behind Gunnar Henderson. In the outfield, the reserves, we got Jarren Duran from Boston, Riley Green from Detroit, his first, Kyle Tucker from Houston, and David Fry in the DH spot from Cleveland, which is an interesting one because he wasn't second in voting to Ryan O'Hearn, who was the second in voting as far as the popular vote goes for the DH position, but David Fry gets the call over him, and that's something you could make an argument about. As far as pitchers go, Tyler Anderson from the Angels, Corbin Burns from Baltimore, Garrett Crochet from the White Sox, Logan Gilbert from the Mariners, Tanner Houck from Boston, Seth Lugo from Kansas City, who, by the way, has been sensational. Something I was not expecting, and I keep waiting for him to, take that step back. But Seth Lugo has been awesome in Kansas City this season, possible Cy Young winner over there, along with his teammate Cole Reagans. Again, that pitching staff in Kansas City has been a huge part, of why they have, of why they've been so good this season, why they're fighting for a playoff spot there. And final starting pitcher, Tariq Skubal, from Detroit, the other Cy Young candidate in the AL. This is a really, really good roster, top to bottom. Not even getting into the relievers, where you have a nasty set. Emmanuel Clase might be the best reliever in all of baseball from Cleveland. Clay Holmes making it in. Mason Miller, everyone's heard about him, the young phenom coming up, just striking everybody down in Oakland. And Kirby Yates from Texas. You could make a couple of different selections there, but overall, again, I thought they did a pretty good job on the rosters this season. You can always make the argument that there's different players that should get in. You can always make the argument that they're snubs, and we will make that argument in the next segment, actually. But you take a look at this roster right now, and aside from missing a bunch of Orioles, I thought they did pretty good. The relievers, I think there might have been better options out there. As far as the pitchers go, I mean, there's a lot of talent in the AL, and I think they did a good job. There was some controversy that Luis Gil didn't make it. We'll talk about that as well in the next segment from the Yankees after his incredible start to the season. But this isn't. You don't punch your ticket early. You gotta go the whole way. And he's kind of had a couple of struggling starts, as well as the Yankees really have been struggling for the last couple weeks. They've been struggling a good amount. That's been represented in our power rankings that we've been doing here. But like I said, overall, I thought they did a pretty good job. There's a couple things that I disagree with. I don't think there's nearly enough Baltimore Orioles on this roster. The Baltimore Orioles were awesome, and they have been awesome. There's only 3 of them that made the cut, and I think they're the top 3 Orioles. But you can make the argument for guys like Anthony Santander to get in as a reserve. You can make the argument for guys like Ryan O'Hearn to get in as a reserve, Jordan Westburg to get in as a reserve. There's lots and lots of Orioles that I thought should have gotten in. At least 4 Orioles I think should have gotten in here. Craig Kimbrell's having a great season in Baltimore, but like I said, overall, I thought this roster was pretty solid, and we'll go over the snub arguments for everybody for every single possible snub that I have here in the next segment coming up. But overall, I think this roster is stacked. You have it always is when you have that all-star roster put together, but that starting lineup, I don't think they made a mistake in it, right? Adley Rutschman, Vlad Guerrero maybe could have been replaced, but there wasn't really a first baseman to challenge him there. You have MVP candidates up and down that lineup, and you know, I think they nailed it. I think they really did. I think the voters did a really good job this this year. You have some years where it's all one team. There was that one year where it was all Kansas City Royals, which they won the World Series that year, so you can't really blame them. But I think the voting was really good on both sides this year. There weren't too many. What are you doing? Why are they getting this many votes? There were a couple in the NL with Phillies fans, but those guys didn't end up making the roster at all. So it all ended up working out. But yeah, in our next segment coming up, we are going to go over all of the all of the All-Star snubs. Go over the NL snubs, the AL snubs, why they didn't make the team, if they should have made the team, everyone that's in this conversation. So stick around for that. We'll go over everything MLB All-Star break and more coming up next here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long. New sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel. Except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just gone over the AL and the NL rosters of the MLB All-Star game that were announced over the weekends. In this segment here, we are going to go over the snubs. There's always a couple snubs, and this year is no different. Although I did think they did a good job with at least the starting lineups, there were a couple of reserves that I think could have gone the other way, and we're going to go through all of them here in just 1 second. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Go and throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, in this segment here, we are going to get into the All-Star snubs. I've been teasing it a little bit in both of these first 2 segments. So we're going to start off with some of the one of the bigger snubs of them all, the New York Mets shortstop Francisco Lindor. You take a look at a lot of metrics, right? There's a lot of metrics in baseball to decide which players are best, how they're having a good season. You can look at average. You can look at on-base percentage. You can look at on-base plus slugging. You can look at that slugging percentage, that triple slash. But one of those numbers that's nice and concise to look at is WAR, wins above replacement. And if you're talking about getting the top WAR players, Francisco Lindor needs to be in there. And there's been a lot of arguments of whether or not he could have a spot. Obviously, the way that the MLB works, each team needs to have their needs to have at least one representative, right? And I think that he probably should have gotten in over CJ Abrams. And as a Nats fan, I love CJ Abrams, right? And I think he has played an all-star worthy season. No doubt in my mind does he deserve to be an all-star. But there were other players on the Nats that could have gotten that nod, and we'll get to them in a second. But Francisco Lindor absolutely deserved to get in here. I mean, you take a look at a guy in Francisco Lindor who, you know, might still get in because Mookie Betts is going to be out. But there's only 40 players that have 2.5 F4. But this is in such a crowded shortstop market like the NL. You have Trey Turner, right? Who's been awesome. You have Mookie Betts. Those two have been the top two shortstops in the league. Then you have Ellie De La Cruz, right? You have Willie Adames of the Brewers. You have CJ Abrams. You have Francisco Lindor. There's only 3 of those guys that can make it. And really with Mookie Betts and Trey Turner, there was really only one slot for 3 or 4 of those guys. So unfortunately, it's just how it plays out, right? And every team needs to get a player in, and the MLB decided to give that to CJ Abrams for the Washington Nationals. And I don't mind that. I think he absolutely deserves to get in. But Francisco Lindor is a guy that absolutely should have gotten him. Speaking of that other national, though, you get to pitching on the NL side. And while most of those pitchers have been awesome and deserve to get in, and all of them really do, there is one switch that I would definitely make, and that's Jake Irvin. Not many of you guys might know about Jake Irvin. He is a starting pitcher for the Washington Nationals. He's not a big name, big brand guy, but you take a look at his numbers when compared to a guy like Logan Webb, and they're near identical. It's just a little bit better on his side, right? You have Jake Irvin, who coming off in the NL, where he ranks 4th in ERA at 2.8 ERA, 7th in walk percentage, 21st in strikeout percentage, 10th in WAR. He's got 2.2 WAR so far. He has been incredible for the Nationals, and again, I really do think that that Logan Webb deserved to get in. But again, we'll do a straight stat by stat comparison. They're both 7 and 6 right now. The ERA is difference by just about 0.3. Logan Webb has a 3.09. Jake Irvin has a 2.8. The WHIP is difference by 0.2. Logan Webb has a 1.22. Jake Irvin has a 1 flat. The WAR numbers are near identical. The opponent batting average is about 50 points better for Jake Irvin. There's just a lot of stats that are very, very close here, right? And I know the Logan Webb is a bigger name, right? And the Giants are a slightly better team than the Nationals are, so they're going to get some of that media priority here. But if I was sitting here, and again, we just had this conversation with Francisco Lindor, I think he should have gotten in. If I'm sitting here and making the decisions, I'm putting Jake Irvin in as a starter, as a pitcher for the All-Star game, and removing CJ Abrams and putting in Francisco Lindor. Now, again, lots of different ways you can go about this, and this is not anything against Logan Webb or CJ Abrams. I think they are both wonderful players that deserved All-Star nods. They really did. But there's always going to be snubs, especially with how good the talent is in the MLB now. There's always going to be snubs, and this is just how it happened to be this year. As far as the another snub goes, in the AL side especially, you have a guy like, you have a guy like Jordan Westburg. We talked a lot about the Orioles that weren't getting in there. Jordan Westburg has been awesome. He's been a top 5 third baseman in the league. He's up there in WAR, but you you talk about again, league representatives. We talked about Isaac Paredes, who is a good player, right? But he just kind of got left out at third, right? Uh, he was the odd man out. I think he absolutely deserved to get in. I would put him in above Isaac Paredes, but the Rays again needed a representative. So it's not like this is a snub that if there wasn't that rule, I bet you he would have gotten in. The other Oriole that I think should have gotten in, you talk about Craig Kimbrell. He's been an elite closer for a very long time in the MLB, at least a very, very good one, very prominent one. He's ahead of all of his career numbers this season. He's been really, really great for the Orioles. They come and bring him in to be their closer, and especially down the stretch here, he's been fantastic for them, shutting down the game. And it's Craig Kimbrell. You know what you get with him. Every once in a while, he's going to blow one just because you're never perfect in the MLB, but he is better than all of his career stats this season, and that is insane to say with a guy that has a Hall of Fame resume already. Craig Kimbrell probably should have been in the All-Star game this season. Another pitcher, and we kind of touched on a little bit in our last segment, Luis Gil. Luis Gil from the Yankees, and again, we've talked about how crowded it is at the top in the starting pitching market. But Luis Gil kind of was a revelation for the Yankees, right? He seemed like a lock heading into June, but he's been bad recently. And in his past three starts, he's been 0-3 with a 14.9 ERA. He lost an entire point in ERA. He was at 203. Now he's down to 3.41. Uh, you know, there's still other guys that could have made the list. Uh, there's only a couple guys below 3 ERA that didn't make it. We talked about Jake Irvin already. We talked Brady Singer of the Royals would have been their third one. But there's gonna be a couple guys that get missed out, right? And Luis Gil had that incredible start to the season. He just hasn't been able to keep it up. He hit a wall in June, just like really the entirety of the Yankees did. And I'm not putting him above most over really any of these guys. You can make the argument maybe you put him in over Tanner Houck, but I'm not gonna do that. Uh, I think that they got these pitchers right. They needed to get Tyler Anderson in there from the Angels. Again, with the way that baseball works, with the automatic, you get a guy in every single time, which is a good thing for the game, right? You get representation from all 30 ball clubs, but there's always going to be snubs because of it, and you can't make too big of a fuss a lot of the time because you say, hey, they didn't have a choice. They had to put this guy in. They had to get a representative from this team. But again, I think they did a pretty solid job. There's a couple guys I would switch. I think Jake Irvin should get in there. I think Francisco Lindor should get in there. And maybe Francisco Lindor should just straight up replace Pete Alonso. I don't think Pete Alonso, he was the lone Mets representative. I don't think he was the best Met. But that's just positionally how it goes in the All-Star game, at least right now. But anyway, let me know what your thoughts are on this team. Let me know who you thought were snubs. If you think the MLB got it right, who the biggest snub is in the league. I'd love to hear from you guys. But in our next segment, we were moving away from the world of baseball. We were getting into some basketball. There was a major sign-in trade that took place this weekend between the Kings, the Bulls, and the Spurs involving DeMar DeRozan. We will go over all of that, all of the moving pieces, and what that means for all of those teams involved. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just spent a lot of time in the MLB as the All-Star rosters were officially announced over the weekend. Pitchers, starters, reserves, everyone involved is officially listed. We went over the NL rosters first, talked about who was a first-timer. 32 players made it for the first time. That's almost an MLB record. That is insane how many new players there are in these All-Star games. As well as the second segment going over the AL, doing much of the same. In our third segment here, we just finished talking about the snubs. Guys like Francisco Lindor, Jake Irvin, Jordan Westburg, these guys, Craig Kimbrell, and many more. There's always going to be a couple snubs with the way the MLB does it, as far as, as far as there being at least one representative from every team, but usually there's a guy that deserves to get in from every single team, so it's not that big of an issue. This year, there were just a couple snubs, and I thought they did a pretty good job. But in this segment here, we are moving out of the world of baseball. We're talking about some basketball as DeMar DeRozan officially joins the Sacramento Kings in a sign-and trade. We'll talk about that deal, talk about everything that went in around it, who won that trade, and what the Kings, Spurs, and Bulls outlook are after this trade. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the chat, throw it in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we're going to get into some basketball here to close out our show. DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan officially joins the Sacramento Kings on a sign-and trade that sends Chris Duarte and 2 second-round picks, along with cash considerations, to the Chicago Bulls. Harrison Barnes and a 2031, unprotected unprotected pick swap with the Kings to the Spurs, and obviously the Kings there get DeMar DeRozan. If you're looking at this directly from a Kings perspective, they get the big name in this trade. They get DeMar DeRozan, but you wonder about the fit here, right? You go from Harrison Barnes, who, yes, if you're just doing a direct upgrade from DeMar DeRozan to Harrison Barnes, or from Harrison Barnes to DeMar DeRozan, absolutely. It's an upgrade, right? But you also have to think about the rest of this team, right? You give DeMar DeRozan a fresh 3-year, $75 million contract. He's making $25 million a year. It's a good amount of money. It's more than you were paying Harrison Barnes to average, 12 points and have good 3-point shooting. The issue with DeMar DeRozan is it doesn't really fit well with the Kings, right? You have a guy who isn't a great 3-point shooter. He's great in the mid-range, making space. And you have the same kind of job for a guy like Domantas Sabonis, who you kind of post down low, have him run the offense, kick it out to all your great 3-point shooters on the outside. De'Aaron Fox, typical point guard, bring up the ball, get it around, run the offense, at least dribble it up. In theory, it doesn't really work. Now, in practice, it absolutely could. You put together a bunch of good players. The spacing isn't going to be as good. Uh, and that's the big issue. You could put DeMar DeRozan off the bench, and that might work better because then you don't have him and Sabonis out there together 100% of the time, and that's really going to crowd the middle. It's not going to develop the space that the Kings need to succeed. As far as this move goes, I think it absolutely raises the ceiling for the Kings, no doubt. You add DeMar DeRozan, he's a great player. This is going to help your team get better. As far as making them championship contenders, no, we're not there yet, right? This is not a team that you add DeMar DeRozan and they're great. They were a top 3 seed in the West 2 years ago, right? But the West continues to get better. They just had a little bit less luck last season. De'Aaron Fox was the clutch player of the year 2 years ago. Last year, they had a couple of issues in the clutch, and adding DeMar DeRozan is definitely going to help that, right? But, it's not going to vault you back to the top of that West. You still have the Thunder, who continue to get better. The Spurs, who honestly I think with this trade also got better, right? They add Chris Paul earlier, and now they're going to get more spacing with Harrison Barnes, who, sure, he's not great at defense, but Victor Wembanyama is long enough and good enough at defense that he can help make up for that. And the spacing that is going to provide with Chris Paul being able to provide some passing, some playmaking, and Wembanyama having so much gravity, Harrison Barnes is going to have a good season down there. I think that's a really good fit. And I think this absolutely makes them better. Not to mention they got a pick swap as well. So this isn't the best deal for the Kings. Now, do I think it's an awful deal for the Kings? By no means do I mean that. And I think this could work. Like I said, if he comes off the bench with Malik Monk, kind of runs that second unit, I'm not sure how open he would be to that. DeMar DeRozan isn't getting any younger, right? And coming to the Kings, it's an upgrade from the Bulls, the situation he's in. And the Bulls are kind of tail spinning right now. They could have gotten a lot of value from a guy like DeMar DeRozan if they traded him last year. They could have gotten a lot of value from a guy like Alex Caruso if they traded him last year or at the deadline or anything. But they continue to trade these guys for pennies on the dollar. They're not getting anything out of this. They get Chris Duarte, who's solid. He's fine, but and a second and a second round and a couple second round picks, right? That's not how you do a rebuild. They're just kind of throwing everything out the window. They're not getting any assets for their guys that can get assets, and it's bad. It's bad management. That's the other side of this trade, right? The Bulls just continue to dig themselves a deeper and deeper hole every single time they make a move, and I just don't get it. I really don't. As far as the Spurs go, I think they probably won this trade. Straight up. Uh, I love the fit of Harrison Barnes with them. We talked about the spacing that he's going to provide. That was one of their biggest issues. They had Wemby and just about nothing else. Regardless of how, Harrison Barnes has been getting worse over the last couple years, he's still better than a vast majority of those Spurs players. You start him over almost everybody on that roster. You've gotten, now 2 new starters on your team, veteran starters, for cheap, along with a couple of rookies in the draft that are going to come in and start. This team is going to be leaps and bounds better than they were at the beginning of last season, and it's scary to think because Wembanyama's only getting better. He goes to the Olympics. He's going to get some practice over there. This is a team that is not going to be fun to deal with in the West for a long time. And I don't know if they're necessarily going to put it together this season, right? It'd be cool if they did, but I'm not 100% certain that they will. I think they'll be a playoff team this year. And I think the Kings might, this trade probably put them in the playoffs, right? A solid 6 seed, not in the play-ins anymore. And when you're making a trade like this, an upgrade's an upgrade, but also it just doesn't move me. I don't like the fit there. And to be fair, there aren't a lot of options out there, right? there aren't a lot of options out there in free agency that you look at and you say, hey, this is what we need to become a championship team. And DeMar DeRozan probably was the best available guy out there, right? But it just doesn't make sense for the Kings. And it never really did. But they get it done. And it's not a super expensive contract, right? It's not committing to him for super long term. It's only 3 years. $25 million is a good amount for him, but you know, I can live with that. I don't think the Kings are going to feel like they got cheated in this trade by any means. But I also feel like if they are excited that DeMar DeRozan is going to bring them to the next level with this team, I think they will be disappointed. Because I think what this does is it's more of a floor raising trade than a ceiling raising trade, right? Adding DeMar DeRozan doesn't move them from playoff contenders to championship contenders, right? It keeps them at that same level, but it makes them more solid. It makes them less likely to miss out on the playoffs like they did last season. And maybe that's enough for Sacramento right now. Maybe they say, hey, let's make the playoffs, let's build. We're not trying to get it all at once. But I disagree with that. I think that might be a mistake for them. Overall, like I said, I think the Spurs probably got the best end of this deal. They got a player that immediately upgrades and fits in their system, as well as some picks. The Bulls, we'll see what they do with that second round pick. We'll see what Chris Duarte turns into, but I don't like it. I really don't. And then, like I said, it's kind of a neutral move from the Kings. So it's an interesting trade, and I'm excited to see DeMar DeRozan back home in California. While this doesn't make them championship contenders, it probably makes them the best team in California, right? The Lakers are going to be a play-in team. The Warriors are going to be a play-in team. And the Kings are there. They're going to be a playoff team. That makes them the best team in California. So you take what you can get as a Sacramento Kings fan. I know it's been a lot of drought over there for a very long time, but I do believe in this team. I like this Kings team. I just don't love the DeMar DeRozan fit. If he comes off the bench, leads that bench unit, I've heard some people talking about that. I like that a lot better in my brain than him starting, but I don't see a world where he isn't starting. Let me know what you think of this trade. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. In this next final segment, we are going to finish up in some college basketball. Dan Hurley is back in the news. He signs a contract with UConn. We'll talk about that and everything to do with his saga this entire offseason. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just finished talking all about the trade between the Spurs, the Kings, and the Bulls that sends DeMar DeRozan to the Kings, Chris Duarte, 2 second-round picks, and some cash considerations to the Bulls, and Harrison Barnes, a 2031 pick swap to the Spurs. If you want to hear all about that, go back just a couple minutes. We also talked a lot about baseball in the beginning of our show. We went over the AL and the NL rosters as well as snubs, guys like Jake Irvin, Francisco Lindor, Jordan Westburg that didn't make the cut. All of those guys, I feel, should have been in the All-Star game. Those were my big three snubs of the year. But in this segment, we're going to finish off our show getting a little bit into some more Dan Hurley news. It's been a bit since he's been in the news. It's been about a month, that whole Lakers head coaching drama, but now we are here. He has signed an extension with UConn. We'll talk all about that in just a second, what that means for the sport of college football, college basketball, excuse me. But before we get into that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish off our show today talking a little bit about Dan Hurley and UConn. He signs a 6-year, $50 million extension to stay in the sport of college basketball. A top coach, maybe the top coach in all of college basketball right now. He gives up $20 million to stay there. He was offered a 6-year, $70 million deal to join the Lakers, if you remember earlier in this NBA offseason. Instead, he opts to come back and go for a three-peat. He's been one of the best college coaches since he got there. He got there in 2018. In his last couple seasons, he's been 68-11, best in college basketball. Obviously, winning back-to-back national titles is an incredible feat. It hadn't been done since the 04, 05, or 03, 04 Florida Gators, back with Joakim Noah almost 20 years ago, right? This is something that barely ever happens, especially with the transfer portal nowadays and one and dones in college basketball, and it's just so tough to win March Madness. It's a brutal stretch of one game eliminations. You can't slip up or you're done against some very competitive teams. Everyone playing their hearts out. So it is a tough playoff to win, and he's done it twice in a row. He goes back to UConn to build on what he's already done. He gets, legacy bonuses. He gets in his contract that's worth that it kicks in next season, 6 years, $15 million. It is a lot, for a college coach, right? In his 6 seasons, let's go over his stats here: 141 and 58, right? 4 straight NCAA tournament appearances, 2 straight national titles, obviously. Past 2 seasons, those 68 wins at the most in any span. He set a UConn record last year with 37 victories. He has the longest streak of double-digit victories in the NCAA tournament at 12 games. That is every single time. That is utter domination. No one has come close to beating UConn, so there's no reason to leave. He's got a great recruiting circle. He continues to get better, and he's already probably the best coach in college basketball right now. So, again, I understand why he stayed. This is going to turn into a little bit of bashing the Lakers here. Like, we talked a lot about this when he originally turned down the job, right? That's a job that only goes down. UConn is a job that is at its height. It could stay solid for a very long time. You don't need to win a title every year in college basketball to be a successful team. It's just so tough to win the title, and you have players coming in and out every single year that it's so hard to build a consistent team, a consistent winner. And Dan Hurley has done that in UConn. Dan Hurley has been able to build that consistent winner. He's been able to build a program that you look at and say, oh, they're a blue blood school now. It's hard to crack into that group. You had Duke, North Carolina, Kansas forever, right? Now you throw UConn in there, I think, very squarely, I think. you can throw UConn in there. Just they've been so good. They're a hot spot for basketball, both men's and women's. You look at a basketball school that is maybe the basketball school, right? It's so cool to see that, and it's awesome for UConn. They got to have something. They suck at football, but you know, it's really cool. And I think Dan Hurley made the right decision by staying in Connecticut, coaching UConn, and he still got a bag, right? $50 million is nothing to scoff at. That is a huge extension, one of the biggest in all of college, and he gets paid like the best college coach, and he absolutely deserves it. So good to see Dan Hurley get paid down there. Kind of wraps this coaching cycle up in a nice neat little bow, right? Heading back, looking for a three-peat. Do I think he's going to be able to pull that three-peat off? I want to say no. I really do in my brain want to say no, but it's so tough. It is so tough to just say no because there's no team in college basketball that's really gearing up to take them down. I'm gonna say no because I'll take the field against UConn any day. I'll take the field against any team just about any day, but I'm very not confident in that. We'll have to see what happens when the smoke clears from the college basketball offseason, and we'll get more into that as September rolls around and the college basketball season really starts to get underway. But anyway, let me know what you think of this contract. I think he made the right decision. $20 million is a lot of money to give up, but he's in a better situation here in UConn than he would have been in LA with the Lakers, in my opinion, at least. Thank you, everybody, so much for tuning into today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I appreciate everybody so much for listening, showing up every single week. I'll be back tomorrow doing one more live show, and then I'm gone for 10 days. I'm going on vacation on Wednesday. So we'll do one last hurrah, one last big show tomorrow for the week, and then I will be off for a while. So thank you everybody so much for tuning in to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I hope everybody has a great rest of your day, a great Tuesday morning, and I will talk to you same place, same time, same place tomorrow. Have a good one. Bye-bye.